So finally, this section is going to examine reasons for fighting as portrayed in Revolution. Now, this is critical because, as I have mentioned multiple times, and as Hugh Hudson himself emphasized greatly when talking about his film, this is a movie that was supposed to get at the motivations of common, everyday folks that got wrapped up in this conflict. So when I first viewed the movie, I was optimistic. Hopefully they're going to explore one or two perspectives based on, say, narratives or post-war interviews, something like that. However, Hudson did not. Instead of exploring the fascinating nuances of different reasons people fought, Hudson simply fell back on portraying the Brits as these snobbish, evil, and incredibly cruel characters, and that's really, as far as we can see, the only thing that motivates Tom Dobb, Al Pacino's character, to fight. He doesn't join the revolution until Donald Sutherland's character pulls out a whip and abuses his son. So that's really the only motivation we see in most of the film. There are other reasons why one might despise British imperialism besides random acts of cruelty, and we don't see that really in the film. Of course, there are other reasons why one would choose to side, to become a loyalist, other than just pure pretension or desire for money, as we see Mr. McConaughey, Daisy's father, sides with the British so that he can profit off of the war. There are other reasons people did that too. Not to say that money was not a motivator for folks on both sides, but really, like anything in history, it's much more complicated than that. So what actually motivated people involved in the revolution? Joseph Plum Martin, Connecticut man who spent many of his youthful years in the service of the army during the revolution and during innumerable hardships, commented that it was a note of admiration to all the world that an army voluntarily engaged to serve their country when starved and naked and suffering everything short of death, and thousands even that, should be able to persevere through an 8-year war and come off conquerors at last. Yet he posed a question as to why would soldiers do this? What motives could compel them to suffer so much for so long? Well, with his personal experience, he gave a variety of different answers. Sometimes he noted that it was social pressure that spurred him on, informing his reader that, quote, that little insignificant monosyllable, no, was the hardest word in the language for me to pronounce. At other times he noted that it was a general sentiment among many of his comrades that they were truly patriotic, they loved their country, and had already suffered everything short of death in its cause. Numerous others who experienced the conflict have echoed Martin's narrative as well. Many were motivated by loyalty to the local colonial polities they considered their true country. Others truly did desire to be free of the yoke of British imperialism. Others were inspired by bonds to their fellow soldiers, even when they were disillusioned with Congress. And yes, some did fight for money, some did fight out of fear, some did fight for social pressure. Nonetheless, the various motives of these men, many of whom suffered greatly and exhibited great courage, were in fact varied and not so reactionary and monolithic as Hudson's Revolution would have you think. Similarly, there were innumerable different reasons why people fought against the American rebels, of course. For British regular soldiers, they were following orders. For certain enslaved individuals in the South, they were hoping that British officials would grant them their freedom for their service. Others felt loyalty to the stable and prosperous empire to which they had belonged. And there are, of course, in addition to these, even innumerable other motives that could compel folks to fight against the Americans. Actually, Hudson's film does very briefly now and then touch on the divided nature of the American colonies. At least he doesn't portray everyone as being ready and willing to join the American cause at a moment's notice. However, this is very minimal, and again, the purpose of his film was to examine the motives of a common man involved on the American side of the conflict. And so we won't delve any more here into the motivations of loyalists for the sake of brevity. In short, by simplifying the motives of his characters and relying on mere tropes to compel them to fight, Hudson not only portrays an overly simplified version of the reality of 18th century North America, but goes so far as to provide a disservice to the many who suffered, bled, and died on both sides in the revolutionary conflict. And once again, this ties back into some of the issues with the film's treatment of material culture. When you portray history as silly and simple, like Hudson does, it really diminishes the importance of the past.